And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Greetings. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Thursday, February 27th, 2025. We're going to start out with the surface weather map for Friday. We have a low pressure that's going to be lifting out of the North Pacific and into the Gulf. This system does have a front with a gale to near a brief period of near storm force winds. This Thursday night, there could be a brief period of storm force winds to 50 knots outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, as well as Lower Cook Inlet, Kennedy entrance. That would be for this Thursday night. And then as the front lifts north eastward, we expect some gale force winds along the front. But that low will begin to weaken as it comes up into the Gulf on Saturday. We have moisture that's also going to pull up along the west side of the coast as yet another low over the course of the weekend will be tracking up toward the southwest portion of the mainland, crossing the Alaska Peninsula. So there could be some accumulating snow across areas of the southwest interior here for this weekend, with lingering moisture along the Gulf Coast, mainly in the form of rain at sea level in coastal areas. Of course, the intercoastal mountains, as you get up in elevation, that'll be snow. And for Friday, we're looking at, for the inner channels, southeast winds 25 knots, gusts to 35 knots, Stevens Passage, waves 4 or 5 feet, maybe as high as 10, 11 feet here. Dixon entrance area, especially outside of Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Along the outer coast, generally southeast to east, gale force winds 35 to as high as 40 knots off of Cape Suckling on Friday, and swells running 18 to 22 feet. For the inner channel Saturday, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots, waves coming down to a couple of feet there within Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, maybe down to 5-6 feet there, Dixon entrance. Sitka down to off of Craig, west-southwest winds 15 knots and waves running 15-16 feet. Southeast to east winds 20 to 25 knots outside of the Icy Strait and Yakutat Bay. For the northwestern Gulf, we're looking at east winds 30 knots within Prince William Sound, 6-7 foot waves outside of Hinchinbrook entrance after that brief period of near storm force winds for Thursday night. On Friday, winds will be east-southeast 30-35 knots. And then as we go down the length of Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds upper middle Cook Inlet at 25 to 30 knots. And still 35 knot gales, lower Cook Inlet, Kennedy entrance with waves there 8 to 10 feet. For Saturday, winds will continue to come down further. East winds across Prince William Sound, 3 foot waves. 25 knot easterly winds outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, 13-14 foot waves. And then for lower Cook Inlet, we're looking at east-southeast winds to 30 knots with waves running 7 to 10 feet, generally speaking. For Friday, that low pressure system just to the south-southwest there of Kodiak Island. Look for east-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots across Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait waves 5 feet. Off the east side there of Kodiak Island, 15-17 foot waves. As we drop down along the length of the peninsula, we're looking at winds becoming more northwesterly at 20 to 25 knots, waves 7 to 11 feet on the North Pacific side and 3 to 6 feet on the Bering side. For Saturday, look for southeast to south winds around Kodiak Island, 25 to 30 knots, and then coming down across the peninsula. We have that weak low center lifting up across there. We're looking at northeast to north winds 20 to 25 knots, especially southwestward of Perryville down through Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and False Passes. Friday starts with northwest winds in the far eastern Aleutians to 20 knots as we go out from around Nikolsky westward through Adak, variable at 10 knots, rather light, and then west of Adak, look at generally northerly winds to 20 knots. For Saturday, northeast to north winds across the eastern and central Aleutians, right around 20 knots. Once we get west of Kiska, they shift back around to the south at 20 to 25 knots. Along the southwest coast, northerly winds to 15 knots coming out of Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bays. Just variable winds around 10 knots there in the Pribilovs. And then out of Norton Sound, down along the lower Yukon coast, northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots all the way out to St. Lawrence Island. There could be a little bit of a drift of the ice pack there to the south. And then for Saturday, variable winds 10 knots continue there at St. Paul and St. George. Look for north winds of 20 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay and northwesterly winds out of Bristol Bay. Waves there 2-3 feet. And along areas of the lower Yukon coast up into Norton Sound, generally northwest to west winds at 15 knots. Coming through the Bering Strait on Friday, Winds will be out of the north at 15 to 20 knots along the west side of the Seward Peninsula to St. Lawrence Island. As we go up along the Chukchi Sea coast, strongest winds will be around the area of Cape Lisburne up to Point Lay to near Wainwright. Look for east-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And then along the Beaufort Sea coast, Utqiagvik east through Kaktovik, generally northeast to east winds at 15 knots. And then finally for Saturday, the Beaufort Sea coast looking at northeasterly winds continuing around 10 to 15 knots. We could have east-northeast winds off of Wainwright down to Cape Lisburne to 25 knots. Lower Chukchi Sea, we find winds passing through the Bering Strait out of the north at around 20 knots, and that would even include the north side of St. Lawrence for Saturday.